Hi, hello, and welcome back to the Karrakin Trade Baronies. Today we're actually going to be talking about less on the specifics of major houses, minor houses, all the feuding between them, and specifically focusing on the politics. So yes, the feuding between them. But in particular, some of the major political groups that I mentioned in the previous video. The House of Remembrance, Ardai, Liberal, Federalist, Hagiographic, Republican, and neo-passacaglian, which isn't represented by any of the major houses. Really, we're just going to be talking about the big umbrellas that these represent. Because within the vast time and space and physical space and population that the Karrakin Trade Baronies kind of stands in for, yeah, you're not going to actually get down to every individual group. Same thing with Union. You just kind of get the broad strokes. Like when it came to cybernetics and Union, for example, that came with a whole list of different distinctions. It's a similar thing for the Karrakin Trade Baronies and these different large political ideological movements. So these aren't necessarily covering everything, nor just all the fringes, and all of these are large, broad kind of summaries, with some kind of central point or points that kind of hold the entire grouping together. In short, broad strokes that can get very specific, and especially when it comes to minor houses. So first, describing it in relation to the houses. Every major house has some kind of alignment to one of these, except neo-passacaglian. But when it goes down to the minor houses, individual members, and a merchant class that's even referenced, it can vary wildly and on the different specific topics here and there. But when it comes to the major house and its representation on the Baronic Council, it's this major. But outside of a lot of these, which just kind of come to define the different thought processes of the modern day Karrakin space, the hagiographers came from the Union-Karrakin conflict. Or not conflict, war. Proper war. So the new Federation isn't doing well, the war is about to begin in earnest, and then as they go out, their ships are sent, and the whole situation. New Federation fleet destroyed piecemeal, and then kaboom. Of those various nobles that had felt the new Federation had dealt with Union poorly in the first place, all those grumblers to begin with, and the various bits of blooded soldiers that had come back or had survived the various bits of ordeals with the current coming conflict, the hagiographers are the group that formed and were the ones to lead the vote of no confidence on the new Federation. They're the ones that welcomed and allowed the modern Karrakin Trade Baronies. However, during the ensuing chaos of everything shifting around beginning to form the current Karrakin Trade Baronies, the hagiographers kind of lost primary power. It was more that vitriol, that immediate gut reaction to what was going on. Doesn't mean they're gone, they're still well and around. But now actually to the politics itself, for that general ideology. The primary houses following it are the House of Stone and the House of Sand. And in general, when it comes to the hagiographer, one, you're militant, so kind of adds up in the Stone's case. Anti-Union adds up in the Sand case as well. But the main thing comes down to a believed weakness within the central authority. The big central tentpole is that the Karrakin Trade Baronies should be a confederacy of worlds. Caracas and the current federal Karrakin monarchy are too weak or stranglehold on the rest of the system, seeing their origins in a central authority just floundering and failing to actually defend both the planet and lose its fleet. And as they saw the previous rulership over the galaxy, you can kind of get their angle on that point. The central authority Caracas, not just getting rid of it or blowing it up, but just having House of Order take its role primarily as its major house, not just underneath the current throne. It'd probably change names and general function, but outside of that, it'd be its own major house, its own planet, its own part of the Confederacy. The last part comes down to tradition. The current way of things isn't necessarily good enough. It is fine. It shouldn't be able to go down any further. This idea that it's degenerating or liberalizing to a point, or that the noble class is giving up its power willingly. And that namely it's foolish. Look at what happened with just mercantilism to an extent in the previous eras, namely pointing back all the way to before Passacaglia, but also to the new Federation. This idea of a separate representative council of some kind ordering all of Karrakin space is what led the new Federation to its demise, in their eyes. And this current mireness, these restrictions, this whole slowing of the larger system placed upon by Caracas is just weighing down the rest of the Karrakin Trade Baronies, similar to the low Passacaglia. So a roundup of your fine talking points. Anti-Union, a bit. Militant, take out the central authority of the Karrakin monarchy, have it just be a confederacy of different nobles and planets, and then finally reinforce the current traditions, and namely the status quo of the order of noble and ignoble. The relations between those two, the various bits of documentation and the way one orders themselves. Now jumping over to their more crazy cousins that don't have any major house representation, the neo-passacaglian. The neo-passacaglian aren't supported by any major houses because they actually want the dissolution of the major houses. Everything with the dynasticlad, everything that's currently going on with the Karrakin Trade Baronies, a lot of that is just a mistake. For you see, the one true way, the one true path was set down by Passacaglia I. The only reason his norm failed or fell eventually was because of his successors. The bureaucrats, the other minor nobles, the various bits of corruption led to the entire norm falling apart. That's at no fault of Passacaglia I. If anything, untouchable. For you see, he was a divine entity that came in at the weakest points of the Karrakin people and laid down the foundations for the rest of humanity, for the rest of Karrakin, and the rest of the galaxy. A very religious sort, to the point of even having their own holy book, the Helios Gate. More a religious order than any kind of political order. The dangerous thing is they actually do have political sway. There's a reason they're one of the major five. But their big thing, and the reason even the hagiographers are a bit hesitant to work with them, even though they're really big on going back in tradition, is they want to go way back. Way back in tradition. What's with these major houses, these rights to an extent? We should bring back the rule of royal separation, which was this law under Passacaglia I that only the noble class were allowed to use high tech. But no, very emperor of 40k ecclesiarchy, imperial truth kind of turned. Go back to the old ways, but timescale wise and roughly the historical equivalent, they are wanting the old ways to be like the 12th century. Us timescale wise, just... they're weird. Because the ludicrous part is, yes, no major house supports this because it wants a dissolution of the major houses. But on top of the weird religious angle, the Helios Gate, Passacaglia I being some kind of material deity, the dissolution of the major houses, and an even stronger central authority within specifically Throne Karraka, the noble house. They want another emperor, they want absolute monarchy. And the big thing with the current teachings in the Helios Gate, specifically mentioning it, is the fact that the Omninet and the Blink are both discoveries that kind of are heralded by Passacaglia I. Signs of the new way of things, signs of technology that allows for that system of a central authority to work. Because again, one of the reasons for the failure of Passacaglia's reign was that delay. In equipment, communication, information, authority. With the Blink and the Omninet, you can get that information immediately, that propaganda out immediately, your authority spread across immediately, and physically have your authority sent there immediately. Also should go without saying, going back traditions-wise. Not necessarily just reinforcing what's there or re-supporting the nobility against the ignoble, but really just going way back. Being a medieval serf in the 12th century built character. And as crazy as they sound, and as they are, they do kind of have a vague point, specifically when it comes down to the various bits of Blink Gates, Omninet, not that those are signs to an extent, but the idea that that can support some kind of central authority. Which is where the weird conflict, even though both the hagiographers and the neo-passacaglians kind of support this idea of tradition and holding on to these different values, different ideas of tradition, and also different ideas of what a major house should be. As in the top of the government and forming a confederacy with each other, or not existing. But again, like the hagiographers, a summary. Want to go back to the enorm Passacaglia? Believe Passacaglia I is a divine entity and follow the teachings compiled in the Helios Gate. They believe that Blink Gates and the Omninet are bits of infrastructure that could support a long-lasting central imperial authority, and essentially that the current major house system isn't needed. It was needed during the Dynasticlad, isn't now. Or the Enorm Tyrannus, essentially, not the Dynasticlad. Now, with all that changed to an extent, we have the Federalists. The Federalists themselves are the central, everything's fine, the centrist. There's a reason the majority of major houses, business is good. Of the major houses that are Federalist, essentially the status quo, the House of Order, because, you know, they're maintaining it, the House of Smoke, the House of Glass, and then the House of Moments. One of their big things on top of business as usual is the fact that keep nice with Union. Don't actively go to war with them. Try to avoid war with any of the other large-scale galactic states, if at all possible, because that's bad for business. And when it comes to Union in particular, war-wise, you're not trying to usurp them. Karabem is their fine seat. Sitting there within the fourth column of CENTCOM, able to actually have a nice lever on the power and politics of Union, and just let Union itself as a large institution take the brunt of supporting and trying to maintain galactic infrastructure. That's all Union's problem. The Karrakin space is just here for the business. Though in saying that, that is a pretty tall pillar, that central tentpole, to the point that the Federalists are just a large umbrella. Kinda going any which way. They can go a bit more hagiographic to a point, they can go way more towards the Republican liberal side, or even neo-passacaglian. But in general, the central standing tentpole is keep the status quo. Maybe expand and improve it a bit, but you don't actually need to change it. If anything, change is bad. It would disrupt everything that's currently going on. Then going a bit off of the Federalist side of things, you end up into the Liberal, with only one major house being the House of Remembrance. So Liberal is still partaking in the status quo, keep noble, ignoble, keep the trade and peace with Union to an extent. But their big thing is extended rights primarily to the ignobility, but to just general citizens. A little more free speech, a little more freedom of travel, an actual safety net provided by the major house, which is kind of telling of the various bits of things that other houses don't allow. Like even the Federalists to a point don't have freedom of movement. Again, that's particularly between worlds. The House of Remembrance's big thing is the concern. Outside of internal movement, that just goes by house to house. But in general, not an entire overthrow of everything with the current status quo and nobility, but just give the ignobility a little bit. Before we continue on, a summary of Liberal. So, hey, we're Federalist essentially. Second, give rights to ignobles, or at least more protections or just general, well, major house looking out for them. Less divide between noble and ignoble. Not necessarily in status and what they can actually do, but interactions between the two. Then for our final of these five, Republican. With our major of houses that follow it being Water, Dust, and Promise. maybe. This is where things get a bit funky, 2 Point, but their whole shtick is, hey, why not get rid of the noble ignoble thing? Everyone is citoyens. Yes, that's actually how it's spelled within the book. But equal under the law. You can keep your noble titles, but that's just it. It's just a title. It doesn't actually have anything tied to it, nor just hereditary claims from hundreds of years ago holding you here. However, due to various bits of tradition and how the House of Order works and the just general larger structure of the baronies, there are still houses. The major house itself acting as some kind of federal government for said region or planet, and then their other holdings. Also representative on the Baronic Council as usual, but the minor houses are different bits of regions, so different bits of land, population, kind of management, positions that are voted for to actually be holding, so the title of a lord or a baron would actually be someone voted for. Now, this isn't any kind of just general utopia or literally everyone's equal, as in profit is a motive for the major house itself still, and within the general larger structure of the baronies. Summary for the Republican: get rid of the nobility. Equality between all the different citizens, removal of all different bits of inheritance from the previous noble class, and lastly, actually changing the entire federal Karrakin system into a republic. Different representatives from all of these different major houses heading to central Throne Karraka. Instead of it being tied to any kind of nobility from all these previous major houses and inheritance, it would be a system voted in. Now, when it comes to the Republicans, they're actually relatively new to Karrakin space. Only 200 years, on the scale of a major house at least. Also on top of that recency, they are seen as the crazy ones. They are seen as equal to the neo-passacaglians. So as the book puts it, you kind of have this nice scale up here. Neo-passacaglians, Republican, opposite ends of a spectrum. Which kind of makes sense when you have, again, nobles in just a feudal system, that, hey, those Republicans over there, that's really scary. Also to add, while water was pretty calm and peaceful to an extent, only had a few skirmishes here or there, dust was a lot more bloody, and who knows with promise. Also, there's little inklings that smoke is beginning to lean in that direction. Maybe Republican, maybe liberal. But with that, we have our major umbrellas here. So those are your major general politics, ideologies, beliefs, ideas of the moment, the zeitgeist of the Karrakin Trade Baronies, and generally the different ways the different major houses lean or their general ideals on the larger scale. While it doesn't necessarily go 100% down to the different ignoble and minor houses, it doesn't necessarily stop there. It's not just at the top level and just not there at all. There's a reason it is the main thing supported by the major house. So if you find someone from the House of Stone, at least a noble, there's a high bet that, hey, they're hagiographers. And when you find one with the Republicans, especially if you're talking to someone in a house, they're probably Republican. So in general, we have business as usual. Hey, give some of our just general ignoble citizens some rights and protections. You then also have, hey, let's get rid of the federal monarchy to an extent and have different confederacies. Oh, hey, wasn't Passacaglia great? Shouldn't we have an emperor or king, just a central one? Man, that tech is looking like it could really allow for that kind of thing now. And hey, let's abolish the monarchy, and in fact, get rid of nobles. But those are of the moment. That's the zeitgeist. Those are the general beliefs, those are general politics to an extent. What's on the minds of the major houses, the other different bits of nobles, whenever the central Karrakin monarchy is brought into question. And with all of this and the great wheel of Dis turning once again, what's the best path forward? Not for the ignoble, not for the noble, not for a major house, not for the throne, but for all of the Karrakin, for all of the Orion Arm, for all of humanity. Thank you for watching the video, and I hope that this absence within the main video itself wasn't too confusing. I know it was, but I hope just it wasn't too much. But I figured it'd be good in its own, isolated pocket. This is just more an expansion on some of the details of, hey, that conflict you heard of inside, this is that conflict. But no, when working on this, I just kept thinking back in my head with the Federalists. Personality Test by Seb Lowe. Fun song, but anywho, thank you again for watching, thank you to my patrons, and have a nice day.